Alright, so big day today because this will be the last video that I leave you. This is our review on the second half of what we did on Module 6 right before we went on our little quarantine, and this will be part of that little test you'll be taking on Thursday. Okay, so we'll go through this. There's just a couple of each, a little refresher, and then that'll be it. So there were these little shortcuts when we had a right triangle, and then we just talked about the altitude in the last review. The altitude extends from one vertex to the opposite side and then forms a 90-degree angle. So we had a couple of theorems here, and one of them, so it was always this, let me do it where you can see it. The extreme over the mean is equal to the mean over the extreme. And one of them was that this length here, so the side or leg of one of these triangles was the mean. So the means again go here and here. So we put x here and then here. And the extremes were the adjacent hypotenuse of this triangle, which is 4. And then the overall hypotenuse of that big triangle, which would have been 20. We set up that proportion, and then we would just solve this. So we cross multiply to get x squared, cross multiply here to get, 80. Take the square root of both sides, and x should be 8.94. Okay. Same thing here. So when we set this up, this here is what we call our geometric mean. So that's going to go here and here. Again, we're just looking at this proportion, how we set this up. And then the 12, the adjacent side is 6. So that's one of our extremes. And then the overall hypotenuse of the big triangle would have been that 6 increased by the x. We'd have to add those two lengths together. That's our proportion, so we would crisscross and then multiply. So the 6 is going to get distributed to the 6 plus 6x. The 12 and the 12 would make 144. And then now we just go through, solve this equation. So we'd subtract 36 from both sides. So that's 108. Divide that by 6. And we would get our x to be 18. All right, so that was one of them. The other one was, if we have this here, the altitude itself, let me create some space here. So now we actually have the altitude as what we are now trying to find. That was the geometric mean. So that goes here and then here. And then this was the one that was a little bit easier. It's just the two lengths that it cuts that hypotenuse into. So one of them would have been 5. And then the other one here is this 15. That then we solve. All right, so cross multiply, 75 is equal to x squared. Take the square root of both sides. And then whatever the square root of 75 is, throw that into your calculator, and then that would be our answer. Okay, and then the last one, we are back to this. This is our geometric mean. So in our proportion, the 6 would go here and here. The adjacent side would be the x. And then the overall side here is that x plus 5. So these are the ones that were a little bit trickier because we're going to cross multiply. Let me show that over here. So x would get multiplied by x plus a 5. And then the 6 times the 6 would give you 36. We would then have to distribute. So these were now the ones that we had to set equal to 0. So x squared plus 5x, subtract the 36 over, and then we would have to factor this. So this is when we would try to find numbers that multiply to be a negative 36, but would add up to be this positive 5. And that would have been a positive 9 and a negative 4. 9 times negative 4 gives you the negative 36, but if you add them together, you're going to get 5. And then our two answers, what would make this 0 is a negative 9. This would be a 4. But if you think about this answer, we can't have this x be a negative length. So the x value of a negative 9 doesn't make any sense. The answer would have to be the 4. All right, so that's those. There'll be a few of those. That's one of the things we did right before we left. The next thing was the 30, 60, 90 triangles. We had these little relationships where, oops, let me erase that. If I have a right triangle, so a 90-degree angle, one angle's 30, which means the last one has to be 60. The side opposite of 30 was always x. The side opposite of 60 was always x times root 3. The side opposite of 90 was always twice x. So as long as we knew this one, multiply that side by root 3, and then double hypotenuse. So with this side here, if we know that our hypotenuse is 18, the side opposite of 30 would have had to have been half of that. If we know that this is 9, then r had to be the 9 multiplied by root 3. All right. This one here would be one of, let's do actually this one. Yeah, give me the harder ones here. 60. So this side here, this is what we would say is our x root 3 side. So what we said we would have to do is just divide this by our root 3. All right, so that's our x root 3 side. What this then does, this is x. So x is always the side opposite of 30. So this we were given is 36. What we now know is x is the 36 divided by root 3. And then h was always twice what x equaled. Well, what we now know is x is that 36 divided by the square root of 3. Now, we did some rationalizing of denominators here with the square root in our denominator, but I wouldn't worry about that. We won't try to get you with those on the test. All right, this one, here's your 30-degree angle. So this is kind of the easiest type, where if we know the opposite side of 30 is 50, that means the opposite side of 60 has to be 50 root 3. And then the opposite side of the 90 degrees, this is always twice x. So that's twice 50, which would then give us 100. That's the easiest type, okay? 45, 45, 90s had this relationship. So if we know it's a 90-degree triangle and this is 45, 45, opposite of 45s, these have to be congruent themselves. And then the hypotenuse was always that length multiplied by a root 2. So the easiest type would probably be this one. In all honesty, don't worry about these. We won't even test you on that. This would be the easiest side. So this angle is congruent to this angle. So the sides opposite of them have to be congruent. So if we know this side is 17, that means this side is also 17. And then the side opposite of the 90-degree angle is always x multiplied by root 2. And we now know what x is. X is at 17. So our answer would just be 17 times root 2 for the hypotenuse. So don't worry about these. These are a little trickier. These will be pretty basic. The big thing here, the one thing that of all things we did while we've been remote learning that you really want to know just for the sake of, SAT, ACT that you're going to see are these trig ratios. This is when we did the whole SOHCAHTOA idea, sine, cosine, and tangent. So if you remember, the sine of an angle is the opposite over the hypotenuse. Cosine of an angle is the adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent of the angle is the opposite over the adjacent. When we would use these, if this is our x that we're trying to find, think about what sides we have here. This is the opposite side, and this is our adjacent side. So since we're dealing with the opposite and the adjacent, we are dealing with this ratio here, opposite and the adjacent. And that then is the reason we have a t here, that is the tangent. So the tangent of x would be the opposite side of 2 over the adjacent side of 18. The way we then solve this is when we would do the second tangent key so that it would look like this on your calculator. So if you hit second tangent on the calculator, you'll see this little inverse tangent, little tangent to the -1 pop up. Then you type in 2/18, throw that into the calculator, that gives you your answer. All right. All right, for this one, we're looking for this side, and you're now given your angle. So think about this angle. What we are given to work with is the opposite side, and this here is opposite of your right angle, so this is your hypotenuse. So we have the opposite side of this angle, and we have the hypotenuse. So if you look right here, we're dealing with this one, opposite and the hypotenuse, and the S stands for sine. So we're going to do the sine of 32 degrees, because that's our angle. That would be the opposite side of x over your hypotenuse of 28. Multiply both sides by 28, so these will cancel, and x would equal 28 times the sine of 32 degrees. All right, and then again, take out the calculator, throw that in there, should give you your answer. 3, the last thing for this, here's your angle. We don't have the opposite side now. What we have is this side here, which is our adjacent side, and then this side here, that's opposite of your right angle, that's your hypotenuse. So we now have the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So now we're dealing with this one here. Adjacent hypotenuse is your cosine. So we would say the cosine of 16 degrees is equal to the adjacent side, which is 46, over your hypotenuse of x. To solve this, we're going to multiply the x over, so that we get x cosine of 16 equals 46. And then the next step is we've got to divide by the cosine of 16. All right, so again, throw this into your calculator. I don't have mine on me right now, but at this point, just plugging in some numbers into the calculator. Take 46, divide it by the cosine of 16, and then that should give you your answer. Okay? All right, 610, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's just kind of going through, setting up some more of these. Maybe we'll do one part of it. Let's say this is obviously going to be your C, that's your hypotenuse always. And then A is our smaller side, so this is 37. So let's say I ask you for this angle here. Let's say that's the X that we want. This should be 45. So that's 45. So we have the opposite side, and we have our hypotenuse. So opposite hypotenuse is your sine. So we would do the sine of x is equal to the opposite side of 37 over 45. This is the type, if I want to get rid of this sine, I hit the second sine. So then it then sets this up. That's what you want to then be looking at in your calculator when you plug that in. All right. All right. And then the last one, little word problems we did with these two. Draw a picture, set up an equation, and then solve this. So it says Charlie is flying a kite at an angle of 67 feet to the ground. So if this is Charlie, here's the ground. You know, here's your kite up here, we'll call that K. So this angle here, you're told, is 67 degrees. He lets out 85 feet of string, so this would be our string here. So that's 85. And then stakes the kite to the ground. All right, the question then is, how high is the kite flying? So we are looking for this length right here. All right, that's your X. How high up is the kite from the ground? So for this one, here's your angle. We have the opposite side of that angle, and here's your right angle. So the side here is your hypotenuse. So it's the opposite over your hypotenuse. So that is your sine. So we do the sine of 67 degrees. The opposite side is your X. The hypotenuse is 85. We would solve this by multiplying both sides by 85, so that the 85s would cancel. And then this is your answer once you throw that into your calculator. 85, the sine key of 67 degrees. All right. The other type we did is what we called an angle of depression. So Sally is standing on the top of a hill. So let's say this is our hill. Here's Sally. the angle of depression is 42 degrees. So what that means is Sally would be looking straight out. That's a 0 degree angle. She's looking straight out. Her angle of depression to the bottom of the hill to a boat. So if she's looking down here at her boat, this angle here is 42 degrees. All right. Well, think about now, if this is our flat surface, all right, the ground as our flat surface, the distance from the bottom of the hill to the boat, here's the bottom of the hill, here is our boat, this is 250. And then the question is, how high is the hill? So what this bait was based off of, if this is our horizontal line looking straight out, well, this is also horizontal. The ground is assumed to be horizontal. And what we have here is what we would have been calling our transversal. We reviewed that a little bit the other day. So what we talked about then is alternate interior angles. So this angle and this angle are congruent. So if the angle of depression is 42, this angle here is also 40 degrees. And then the question is asking you, how high is the hill? That means we're looking for this. All right, so from there, if we now look at this angle, the sides that we are left to work with, this is the opposite side of that angle, and then the 250 is what we would call our adjacent side. So opposite and adjacent is the tangent. So we would do the tangent of 42 degrees is equal to the opposite side of x over the adjacent side, which is 250. Multiply both sides by 250, and then whatever 250 multiplied by the tangent of 42 is, again, pull out your trusty calculator, throw that in there. That should give you your answer. All right, that's a wrap. Last video, again, test on Thursday of this week, and then next week if you got anything to make up, still looking to get anything turned in, that's pretty much what next week will be. All right, so if you have any questions, reach out. If not, we'll see you for the test in a couple of days.